So basically, you can use the same approach, like giving something, not just pitching yourself in a podcast, but thinking about how to give back on that. And one of my strategies is simple, like it's I think it has a name actually. It's called like.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Jolly SEO's TLDR. We are your agency for earned outreach if you are trying to get your brand out there in the media. And this episode is perfect for you because we're going to talk about building trust around your brand here. Please reach out anytime, but in the meantime, you've got an awesome episode ahead of you. Gabe Marusca, thank you so much for taking the time. You're going to talk to us about how our listeners can build their own systems to build trust behind their personal brand. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much, Greg, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to learn from you. First of all, what stood out on LinkedIn is your personal brand. So today, the listener's going to get a masterclass on building trust around their personal brand. And the reason we're here together is because your personal brand immediately instilled trust in me to want to reach out to you and see if we can do an episode together. So I'm excited. And the first thing we're here to talk about is this native medium we're on right now is the podcast. And not everyone's comfortable with podcasting. Even me, the intro sometimes it can be cold. Having a rapport with the guest can be challenging. In your own hosting experience, like what's this journey? How long have you been doing this? And how have you developed this skill set over time?
It basically started as an experiment. I wasn't confident or by any means an expert in it. I learned everything I could in 2 weeks about podcasting. Started 3 years ago, almost 150 episodes recorded so far in the last 3 years. And man, it was a journey, but it was a journey of learning, journey of like building these repetitions and gaining more trust. And it's interesting that you mentioned in your message that I seem confident on camera, and I'm like, oh, that's great to hear because I was never like that. I was like awkward, like I was making a lot of mistakes. I'm still doing those and so on. But all in all, it's a wonderful way to have this kind of conversation to, like you mentioned, to build trust. And in my humble opinion, it's one of the easiest way to build trust nowadays. Is it's the trust is all about reputation, and when you show up consistently every single week or multiple times a week depending on what type of podcast you have, it's so much easier to for people to feel they know you rather than just, I don't know, posting on social media, which most people don't enjoy, like constantly showing up on social media, posting daily and so on. But when it comes to like showing one time a week, doing an interview style or a solo episode, it is different because it's much more deeper. I always love to say that social media content is like 1 inch deep, but long form content like podcast is like 1 mile deep. And not sure about your take on this, but at least that's my experience when it comes to long form. It's much more easier to build that reputation and strategically building trust.
Okay, well, yes, I agree. And even so, someone's listening to this. They're seeing the view count at the bottom of our episode here on Jolly SEO's YouTube channel, and they're thinking, but was it really worth it? Because I know that I look at it and I think, dang it, like there's people going viral with millions of views, and I'm in the double digits. We're B2B though, so it's different. And the podcast I have found to be a very interesting one because I struggle with imposter syndrome. And so comparing myself with these people who are going viral, getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of views, and I'm in the double digits, I question it myself. Is it really worth it? Is this working? And I don't know about your experience. Somehow, even on the transactional level, it's been ROI positive, and I put it in air quotes for anyone just listening because this isn't really what it's about. We're here to talk about trust actually, but it's been a fascinating realization for me to combat that imposter syndrome constantly and realize actually the podcast, despite the low views, is still making money here. Hey, hope you're enjoying the show. We're going to get right back to it. Real quick, if you're not sure how you're showing up in AI tools like ChatGPT, Perplexity, and the like, click on that first link in the description. If you fill that out for us, we'll send you your own AI visibility report and see how we can help you boost your results. All right, without further ado, remember that link and enjoy the rest of the show.
Exactly. And that's a very good point, because often when people think about podcasting and making money out of it, monetizing it, they think about the likes of Joe Rogan, Stephen Bartlett, and Mel Robbins. And they're like, all right, those guys are, as you mentioned, going viral, and you hear the sponsors they have, right? So you assume they're making a lot of money. But even those people, if they are not signing a huge deal like Joe Rogan did with Spotify, but for example, Stephen Barley was mentioning that he's making like roughly like 1 million or something a year through the podcast, and is the second biggest podcast in the world, right? So that's not a lot of money for the second biggest podcast in the world. But when it comes to us, like I'm in the same boat as you. Like I'm gaining like 2 digits times of views on YouTube and couple of downloads on Spotify and Apple, but it's not that what makes money, right? And at least how it works for me is quite straightforward. I use it as a networking tool and building relationship basically with my guests, and through those relationships it gets return for me. And I am strategic about it, so I always, when it comes to building a strong and trustworthy social profile, if you want, or a personal brand, it's about being strategic. And in my case, it's simple. Because they give me their time to be on the show, I give something back, not just a platform for them, because I know that it's not a huge, I don't know, audience in front of them, but I give them my time. So I share with them a breakthrough session with every single guest, with some exception, because some of them, in all honesty, I cannot help them. But I give them that breakthrough session, which is roughly 45 minutes long, in which I try to help them have exactly that, like a breakthrough in their business, in their marketing. And if that happens, it's a win for them as well, and a win for me too, because first of all, I show them that I know my stuff, I can help, and they might not need that. Like they might have that breakthrough and they go about with it, but they will remember me. When someone in the situation that I can help comes their way, they'll point out to me. And through that simple thing, like giving another hour of my time, because there's 1 hour with the interview and like 45 minutes roughly with the breakthrough session, and plus what I prepare, through that time, I gain that trust and it comes back to me. I get clients out of that. Like 50% of my leads come through the podcast. And it's a huge number. Like imagine just spending 2 hours a week on that and you get 50% of your leads out of it. And often there are things, these are the things that people don't see when it comes to the back end of the podcast.
You know, this is a perfect fit for an interview I had with Jack Chambers Ward of Candor, Search with Candor. And our episode, in the SEO world, we have been impacted by a decrease in click-through traffic onto websites. And our episode was talking about what can publishers do to monetize with less traffic going to their website, because a lot of them made money off of whether it was a transaction on their website or a display ad that was making money for them for each visitor. One of his awesome ideas was to start an insiders podcast. And his point was not necessarily that you're going to make money one to one, but exactly aligned with what you just said is you're investing more into the community. And when you do have other products or services, or they do think about someone in their network who could maybe purchase something else from you, it's that podcast that you're going to give the insiders that is going to increase their likelihood of buying from you. So I'm amazed that you spend that extra hour with guests. I'm a little embarrassed to tell you I wasn't planning to spend an extra hour with you after this and give you freebies. So I'm definitely learning here from you today. Uh, if I already learned that I'm not the best host here, I probably have a bit to learn from you about being a better guest as well. So, what can you teach us about appearing on other people's podcasts, whether it's the outreach or maybe when you're showing up, like we showed up here today, you were prepared. What can I do to improve my game when I'm a guest on other people's podcasts? And maybe if it wasn't really clear to the listener, it's a big part of my outreach is to be a guest on other people's podcasts. So, what's the purpose or strategy behind this in the first place?
So basically, you can use the same approach, like giving something, not just pitching yourself in a podcast, but thinking about how to give back on that. And one of my strategies is simple, like it's I think it has a name actually. It's called podcast swap, in which you just you're a podcast host and it's like you want a podcast swap. That's an easy way, but of course you can get more complex. In order to get into a bigger podcast and so on, you need to dive a bit deeper, like to truly understand that podcast, to make sure you're a good fit, you understand their audience and so on. But the point is that once you land that recording, you don't stop there. You try to give something back. And I use the same thing, the same breakthrough session I offer to those that, so be prepared to receive it as a gift. So it's an easy way to go a step further. So it doesn't have to be that. Maybe you're not into consulting or into coaching, but if you're offering some sort of services, think about what part of those services can be helpful for that host. And through that, and not to mention, it's such a powerful tool when it comes to being a guest in a podcast, because you borrow that trust of your host in front of their audience. And you don't have to build an audience from zero. You don't have to start a podcast. You can go where they already are, right? And that's the power of being a guest in a podcast, or not just a podcast. And I think we'll type into that as well, but there are many ways you can tap into other people's audiences. And but being on a podcast is the easiest one. And the truth is, most podcast hosts are searching for guests. It's hard to find high quality guests, and somehow might have like a long list of recordings already, but at some given time in the future you might be able to get a spot. And you should be strategic about it. You don't just go, maybe at the beginning, yes, you try to go on every single podcast to build that confidence and so on, but slowly I'll suggest to like be strategic to make sure the audience that they're having, it's your audience, not just some random podcast that you found online.
What are some filters you use when you're thinking about guesting? You know, one example for me, my co-founder Morgan Taylor and I, we paid some podcast outreach services, and we found, dang it, they're just taking our money and then buying some like softball pitch uh, paid placements on some podcasts. These had no value to us. That there wasn't anyone listening that aligned with our ICP. So we learned over time to how we evaluate a guest opportunity. But what are some filters that you use, you know, when you received actually outreach from me to see if you want to be a guest, but when you're thinking about doing outreach for yourself to look for guest opportunities?
So I'll answer in two ways. Like one, when I search for myself for being a guest in the shows, and the other one when I receive a pitch and so on. So when I research a podcast, I'm looking, probably familiar with Listen Notes. It's a website that ranks podcasts. And I try, first of all, to make sure they have some sort of reach. So to be in the top 5% or sometimes even top 10%. Even that, for example, my podcast, Authority in the Wild, it's in top 10%, doesn't have a lot of reach. So I'm very careful with that. And that's one thing. The other thing is to be inside the niche that I want, right? In my case, is business, entrepreneurship, and so on. And as well to ensure they post consistently, they release consistently episodes. If the last episode was like 1 year ago or 6 months ago, maybe it's not a good fit. So those are kind of the filters. And based on that, I'm trying to figure out, listen to 1 or 2 episodes if I have time, or at least like get research with an AI tool to make sure that I understand exactly what they try to achieve with the podcast, because I want to be a good fit for them as well, not just to pitch anyone that I found on that list. Because if you go to listen notes, you can get like a lot of podcasts that fits that particular filter. And based on that, I make a decision if I should reach out. And usually I go on social media. I don't reach out through email, because emails are very hard to get in front of people. Like, everyone is receiving a lot of emails, and there are a lot of gatekeepers and so on, especially on bigger shows. So I try to connect with the host, or if they have a producer, with a producer. And based on that, I start to build some sort of connection, and trying to make sure, for example, I engage a bit on their post on social media, to kind of, they feel familiar with my name, even if they don't remember it. But when they see in myself in DM, and if I comment 2 or 3 days before on their, let's say, LinkedIn posts, they might remember me, and that increases the chances of being accepted. And on the other side, when I receive a pitch, I make sure, of course, if the person pitching, it's a right fit for my audience. And I have some things like, I love to have guests that are super authentic. Like, they don't just rely on results they provide to either their clients, or I don't know, bigger achievement they have, like big exit as an entrepreneur or whatever. But I love to see people that are vulnerable, that are learning from what they went through when they build a business and so on. So I look at some sort of those things, and to make sure they are open for a raw conversation, and they don't want all the questions that I'm about to ask to be sent over, because I don't even prepare those. It's a free flow conversation that I host. So that's kind of the things that I filter to, and I'm not looking like how many big following they're having or any of those sorts. Even that might help as a podcast host, but I'm looking at other things. Like, I want a good conversation, and I'm a curious person, so I want to see if I can learn something from them as well.
Okay, we're right now talking about visual and audio. One topic we really wanted to hit, though, in this conversation is maybe someone just isn't comfortable with this format, and they want to get still a chance to connect with other people. I have loved being part of Slack communities, Facebook groups, these text-based communities. And you have an interesting suggestion here that I've never taken advantage of. So I'm actually here. I'd love to ask you a few questions about this. You were suggesting that another way you could build trust in your personal brand is in communities. I presume that you're already in, but maybe you could tell me more about this. Maybe you join communities for this express purpose, is to host workshops in other people's communities. So are you talking about in person, online? Are you talking about asynchronous, like webinars? What are we talking about here?
So there are both two ways that I do it. One, it's in-person workshops, and usually I used to be, I kind of still am a digital nomad for the past 7 years. I'm now settled, but uh, I still consider myself, and I will never stop traveling. And when I travel between places, I usually work from co-working spaces. And co-working spaces are a good place to skill share, right? And I built some sort of relationship with either the working space owner or the manager and so on, and I pitch them to share something of value to the co-working space audience, and that's one way of doing it. And imagine that in a co-working space, I are usually my target audience. They are entrepreneurs, they are consultants, and so on. So it's an easy way to show myself in front of them. And the other one, it's in online communities, and this comes as a natural extension of the podcast itself. So basically, building this relationship with my podcast guests, or when I'm a guest in other people's podcasts, I stay in touch with them, I connect with them, I see what they are up to, and most people have a community. And casually asking sometimes, and sometimes they just invite me because they know what I'm doing. And based on that, if it's a good fit for them, or in some cases, they're clients, former clients, that I do something for them, and they're like, would you like to talk about it in my community? So it's a natural next step, and that's why it's all these things are linked together basically. And when it comes to like showing up, uh, it's an easier way indeed than the podcast, but I'll argue that even the podcast can get easier with time. But when it comes to like hosting a small workshop inside the community where probably 10 people will show up, it's much more easier to think about it, especially if you have like some sort of track. But it's very quick to build that reputation and trust, because those people already trust the host of that community or the facilitator of that community. And if that person invites someone as an expert to join and host a workshop, it's much more easier for you to be trusted.
Yeah, and this has been a big initiative for me to do in-person speaking at conferences and events over the past year. And when you're up on the bigger stage, it feels very empowering, very nerve-wracking also, but very empowering. But actually, it's harder to form that connection. You do get some of that transfer of trust, but it's such a big event that it's kind of diluted. Whereas the smaller events, I feel like the networking had a lot more richness to the interactions. And so I can only imagine if you're at the co working spot where 10 people show up, going back to how we started this, right? Maybe double digit attendance is like, dang it, that's underwhelming. But it's more about the quality because, as we all know, as business owners listening here, or service providers, or even employees, you don't need thousands of clients or customers. You really come away from that event with a couple more fans, not even a client. It'll all pan out in the long run if that's your approach to this. At least that's my take.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because I'll always select 10 people in a room seeing me doing something around my expertise for an hour. Then I don't know, 10,000 people like dumb scrolling on toilet while
Yeah.
watching something,
Yeah.
some funny videos. And it's much more, it's a bigger trust build activity in that situation. And for example, I think 2.5 weeks ago, I hosted a workshop in a community, and there were like 12 people attending, and 5 of them become clients. Like it's such an underrated thing. It's still, and people are, and of course, we can have a full conversation around how to host a workshop. But the point is to make sure you solve a small problem from the bigger problem that your service is solving. And that way, it's easier for them to make the next step and actually solve the whole problem.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for re-inspiring me to do some local workshops. I honestly put that idea aside as too intimidating, but I can appreciate now. Like, if we're brave enough to come in here and do a podcast, maybe we can be brave enough to get out there and talk to some people face to face. Gabe, we try to keep this kind of short and sweet, but there's something I love about this podcast that people come on here like yourself. You have expertise in personal brand building, and I don't, as much as I've tried to cobble it together over the years. So I want to ask you, is there something I forgot to ask or I didn't ask that, as we're coming to a close here, you're thinking, boy, I wish he had asked this so I could share this with the audience?
Yeah, maybe exactly on the topic on the podcast, right? Like all these elements that we share acts as SEO improvement to your personal brand, basically to your name. Because I love the Google test, in which what happens if you Google your name, and if you have a podcast, if you're showing up in podcast, if you host workshops in communities, if you're active on social media a bit, those things will appear in search results, right? Or nowadays in AI recommendations. And you can ask ChatGPT, you can ask Perplexity, Gemini, who is and your name. And you'll be surprised in a good or bad way, I don't know, but do that and see what happens and improve that, because you have means to do it. Like improve your website, social media, be consistent everywhere, and based on that, see what Google or other tools are showing up when you search your name.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. I have more questions. I was just checking out your online content. Where would you love people to contact you, look you up if they want to learn more?
You can go to my website, gabemarusca.com, or searching for the same name on Google and see the results. You'll probably see LinkedIn there, some podcasts that I've been featuring in, and so on. And but the easier way, it's my website and LinkedIn to get in touch.
Well, Gabe, thank you so much for your time today. I hope you come back on.
Thank you so much, Rick, for having me. It was a pleasure.
See you next time, everybody.